Welcome back to the S-By podcast, everyone. Newfoundland's #1 podcast. I'm your host, Robert Greeley, and today's episode is super exciting. We have the Honourable Judy Foote, current Lieutenant Governor of Newfoundland and Labrador, joining us this evening. We talk about her career as a whole and, just a whole bunch of different things. It's an incredible chat. I want to give a special thanks to her and her team for helping us set all this up. And it's in correlation with my program at Ryerson University. So I'm going to be posting a video tomorrow on my personal YouTube channel, Robert Greeley, and it's going to basically be a whole breakdown on what it's like to interview a Lieutenant Governor of Newfoundland and Labrador. So without further ado, we're just going to hop right into the chat. I'm your host, Robert Greeley. This is the Yes-By podcast, Newfoundland's #1 podcast. Enjoy. Her Honor, the Honourable Judy Foote, the 14th Lieutenant Governor of Newfoundland and Labrador. Welcome to the S-By podcast. Thank you so much for hopping on.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be with you.
It's been a minute since we last saw you. Obviously, I was a summer student for you for one summer. I learned lots, and it's exciting to kind of see how, things have changed very much for myself and you over the course of that little span there.
Well, it's always nice when you can come back together after having a good relationship and a good working relationship. It was really a pleasure for me to have you with us as a summer student.
Now, in terms of your career, I want to kind of get right before, right? We're in Grand Bank, kind of your childhood and everything like that. And I mean, mind you, that town is one of the best spots in the island. I love it. My grandparents are from there, obviously. So I have lots of fond memories in Grand Bank, but what moments in your childhood do you really think helped spark a career in politics and even to where you are now in your lieutenant governor position?
Well, that's an interesting question because I'm not sure anything in my childhood would have led me down this path or the path to politics. I lost my mother when I was 3 years old. She passed when she was 36. So that's a difficult time in your life. So in terms of being encouraged to do your best, you kind of depended on others other than your mom to lead you down that path. So I can't really say that there was anything in my childhood. I guess in some respects, the fact that I had lost a parent that had an impact because you're looking to others to fill that role. I had a wonderful dad who served as both mom and dad, and I will forever be grateful to him for that role that he played, which had to be difficult, having just lost your wife and then having a 3-year-old to raise. So there were close family connections to whom you turned, and I guess they were all doing their part to make sure that I survived, knowing that not having one of your parents, it isn't that easy. So in terms of the childhood, I guess you become a survivor. You make sure that you do whatever you have to do, but always with the encouragement of others to get you through a difficult time. So it wouldn't have been so much anything they said or did that it would have led me down a particular path, other than to know that I was loved, that I was cared for, that people were kind, and that they were going to make sure that I did what I needed to do, first, of course, to get through school and to get through high school in the end. But I have to say there was never encouragement in terms of going to university or pursuing post-secondary education, all of which would have been required for the positions that I've since held.
Throughout that time outside of school, are you into sports? I know soccer is obviously really big in Grand Bank, or were you more kind of spending your time in the arts or maybe even music?
Well, I wasn't very athletically inclined. That's not to say that in high school I didn't play sports, because I did. I thoroughly enjoyed volleyball and of course did all of the sports that you would do in school, but never to a degree where I excelled in sports. I remember in high school, my principal at the time, Mr. Allison May, had invited us or asked us, because he was our English teacher, to write a story. And I did. And he was so impressed with that he said to me, "You should be a writer." And I thought, well, this is the first time that I'd heard anyone say that you should be, or that you have a skill or a talent that could lead you down this path. So that was the beginning of my thinking of, yeah, I like to write. Maybe I should do that. So that was encouraging for me to have someone recognize a talent that I could take and run with.
Now, Your Honor, I was a terrible high school student. Low grades, didn't even really learn my lesson through my undergrad. Failed a class or two, some bad marks, but I still somehow, kind of kept it going, and obviously pursued more post-secondary education at the master's level. I'm curious though, for yourself, what kind of high school student were you? Was the writing aspect something that really got you engaged in the classroom?
Well, let me say you did do well for someone who you're saying, admitting not being a good high school student. For me, it was being engaged, being involved. So I was involved in everything there was to be involved in high school. So the head of the cheerleading group, the editor of our school newspaper, served on the student council. So I don't know if there was involved with the radio program at our school. We had a very vibrant school. So always involved in the extracurricular activities. Did I really excel in my academic studies? No, but I did okay. So it's a combination of doing okay in my academics, but at the same time, being so involved in the extracurricular activities that, and encouraging others to be involved too.
Yeah, that's comforting to hear, because that very much similar in terms of my just student career is, involved a lot, but also, doing okay in academics, and sometimes you slip the course a little bit.
That's how we learn.
Exactly. Well, I'm still learning, because I still think to this day, and my advisor for my research will even shake his head at my note-taking capabilities. Now, I'm curious how you, in terms of post-secondary, deciding that, Memorial University of Newfoundland would be home for your post-secondary in a little bit, and then obviously Lambton College.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, it's our only university. Interestingly enough, as I said previously, there was really no encouragement in terms of going to post-secondary education. So when I graduated from high school, I actually went to work. Went to work in St. John's, working down in the Royal Stores as a receptionist typist. And then my sister actually was supervisor of Terra Novotel in Gander. And she kept saying to me, you should apply and maybe come to work with Terra Novotel. And I said, well, what does that involve? So it was as simple as connecting phone calls. So I went out and did the test and passed. So left the Royal Stores and went to work with Terra Novotel. Now I can tell you, even though the money was fabulous, in fact, all of the employees at Terra Novotel driving around Gander in their new cars and having a fabulous wardrobe because they made that much money. So I thought, well, this isn't bad. I can do this. I was 18 years old at the time. And but if you worked at Terra Novotel, and it was just that, it was connecting up clients with people they wanted to speak to. And it was the keyboard where you actually plugged into the board to connect people. And I remember, and I'll tell this story, because of course the base was in Gander, and you'd have all of these young servicemen working, and they'd want to connect with their loved ones in some other part of the country. So you always, if they were, and they'd be calling from they'd be calling from a payphone. So of course you had to tell them how much it would cost. So it would be like, if you're going to be on for 3 minutes, put in this amount of money, and they would do that. So then you'd have to split your phone to be able to go in and tell them, well, your time is up, but if you want to continue to speak, it's going to cost you this amount of money for another minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes. And more often than not, because you knew they were lovebirds who were connecting, and you knew they didn't have much money. So you tell them how much it would cost for another minute or another 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and they would put the money in, and you hear them say, well, that's all the money I've got, to their loved one. And then you go, okay. So more often than not, you forgot the time. And 10 minutes later, you're going to say, oh, I'm sorry, your 3 minutes are up. But they always got extra time to do, to speak to each other. So it was, but after a while, I think you can imagine that that would get to be pretty boring. And after about 3 months, I thought, I cannot do this. As good as the money is, and all the things that come with that, I cannot do this for a living. So I applied to university. I decided, without any encouragement, that I was going to go to university because there had to be more to life than this. And I did. And I applied to Memorial and went in and started doing a Bachelor of Social Work, and thought that might be what I would like to do. But after a year or two, I thought, no, my strength really is in writing. My strength is in, so I switched and did a Bachelor of Arts with a major in English. And then I did a second degree in education. So I taught school for 1 year, and down in Grand Bank, I taught music for a year. And having done that and thinking, knowing, I admire teachers so much. It's something that you have to be committed to, something that it's a dream job for people who want to be teachers. We were there, my husband and I, because I was married now and had a little girl, and we thought we should move back into St. John's because of the work that he was doing in Grand Bank was finishing up. So we moved back into St. John's, and I did some substitute teaching, but it was hard to get full-time work. So CBC had a position open as a story editor, and I applied for that. And I will tell you, I was actually 9 months pregnant when I applied for that job, and went in and had the interview, and didn't get the job, but they were impressed enough that they wanted me to come back and work in the newsroom. And so they said, how soon can you come to work? I said, give me 2 weeks after the baby's born. So I went to work at CBC in the newsroom 2 weeks after my son was born, and loved it, loved working in the newsroom. But after a while, I ended up with 2 children, and it was kind of like, I'm here in the newsroom, but I have no training. I'm a good writer, but I really, in terms of getting footage for TV, because this was TV, I thought maybe I should do a journalism program. So anything that I would want to do would have to work for my husband too. We had our 2 children, and so if I was going to go to journalism school, he would have to find work wherever I went, or I would have to find a journalism school wherever he could find work. So that's why we ended up at Sarnia in Ontario, and that's where Lambton College is located. And so I did the 2-year program there in radio, television, journalism arts. And I will tell you this, that it was while I was doing my journalism program that my 3rd child was born. So Heidi was born in Ontario, and I took time off school. I think it was a month or 2, and I went back to school and finished up my journalism program. And then we ended up coming back to St. John's. I had called back to CBC to see if there would be a job available, and they said, come on back. We'd love to have you back in the newsroom. So that's how I ended up from post-secondary, and ended up with CBC as a news reporter with CBC.
One thing that stuck with me, you taught music for 1 year in Grand Bank. What year was that? Did you teach any of did you teach my mom or any of my aunts?
What year would that have been? That would have been in 1970. 1975.
Okay, and what grade was it? Do you remember?
Well, music would have been all grades.
All grades. Okay.
All grades, yeah.
Yeah, you might have. You probably might have taught one of my aunts, or I think my mom's the second youngest, so maybe one of the other ones. Yeah.
Okay. What were their names? What are their
Marcia,
names?
Marcia, Rosalind, Marcia. There's one Marcia, or sorry, Bonnie, Rosalind, Marcia, Maureen.
Okay.
They're not going to be happy with that. I just butchered like all their names. Family. Yeah.
I may have. Yeah.
From what I've heard though, they a little bit of a troublemaker. So who knows? Maybe maybe they were causing too much trouble in the class, and you just.
Oh, I can't imagine. But back to my comment about how much I admire teachers.
Yeah.
I think it was my stint as a teacher, and then filling in when other teachers weren't available. That kind of convinced me that maybe I'm not cut out to be a teacher. I really admire teachers, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe there's something else I'm meant to do.
Now, one thing that's interesting with you mentioning you were really the driving force to getting yourself into a post-secondary institution. Like you wanted to make that step for yourself. I know with me growing up, my parents always kind of wanted me to pursue higher education, but to the point of like an undergraduate degree. So I see the similarities in the sense once I got to the master's level and thinking that that was something that I wanted to do, it kind of internalized came within and me wanting to be like the best version of myself as possible and as competitive as I possibly can be in my field. For you, what do you think that step was, that the driving force that really was the foundation of making that decision?
Well, I think the thing that I know about me is that what keeps me going is that self-motivation, that I can do more, believing in myself, knowing that I'm capable of doing more. People have all often said to me, and most people have one career in their lifetime. So they're either a doctor, or they're either a lawyer, or they're a teacher. Not a lot of people change careers, or at least not in my generation. I think it's different now, but for me, there was always something else I wanted to do. So I've had about 6 career changes in my lifetime. This one now, of course, it's a 5-year appointment. And who knows what happens after this, but it's always wanting to do more, wanting to make this world a better place, being able to help where you can. And whatever that career I was in, there was always thinking outside of the box. Okay, what can I do? How can I advance? And it wasn't for wanting to advance for me. It was what more can I do to help? So being at CBC and now being the mom of 3 children, it was a busy life. It was a very busy life. And a job became available at the university, director of university relations. And I applied and I got the job. And that took me into an environment that I loved, where you were surrounded by young people, where there were students all the time. And it was such a wonderful place to work that I thoroughly enjoyed that. And again, being there, being able to help where I could. But again, that involved, just like CBC did, communications. But rather than just communicating the news, it was now looking at an opportunity in a university setting to not only be involved in public relations and marketing, but allow me to continue to write, which I love to do. So at Memorial, I was there, first I went there as manager of communications. And then my boss at the time, who was the director of communications, retired after I was there 2 years. So I was offered his job. And I stayed there until I was approached by the chief of staff or the premier of the day, who happened to be Mr. Clyde Wells, to consider if I would come to work for them. And I thoroughly enjoyed what I was doing. So my first response was, no, thank you for the offer. I really appreciate it. And I can tell you, just going back to my dad, when I told him I had been offered the job to go work in the political environment, and his politics, of course, was always liberal. But even then, when I told him I had been offered a job to work with the government, and it was with the Premier Wells, he thought I was crazy. Why would you do that when you have such a secure employment at the university? Why would you give that up and to go into the political realm? Well, when I first went there, it wasn't political. It was an opportunity to put in place a communications program for the government as a whole. And I thought, well, that would be neat, but this would have been, I guess, the chief of staff had called about 3 times, and 3 times I had said, no, thank you for the offer, but I really like where I am. And my boss at the time was Dr. Leslie Harris, the best person you could ever work for, an incredible, incredible individual, and thoroughly enjoyed his company. So after the 4th call from the Premier's office, I thought I better let Dr. Harris know that I'm getting these calls. And then I thought, as a courtesy, I should at least go meet with the Premier, because I really didn't know him. And so Dr. Harris said to me, you sure you want to do that? And I said, well, as a courtesy, I should go and let him know that I'm not going to leave the university. He said, okay. He said, that's okay. You go and let him know that you really like it here and that you're not going to leave. So I went and met with the Premier. Such a nice man. But the upstart that I was, of course, with the skill set that I had in terms of communications and my writing skills and marketing skills, I said to him, if I'm going to take on this job and it's not political, then I want you to understand that if I were to give you advice, I would expect you to take it. Expecting him to say to me, well, who do you think you are? But he was so courteous and said to me, of course I would. So I thought, well, what do I do now? And so I came back and talked to Dr. Harris and told him that maybe this is something I should do again for my province. If there's an opportunity for me to make a difference in Newfoundland and Labrador working with the government, then that's something maybe I should look at doing. And he said, are you sure? And I said, well, no, but it's an opportunity to help. And I said, I will, would come back. So he said, well, I know the Board of Regents would give you a year's leave of absence to do that. And I thought they would do that. And he said, yes, of course, I'll speak to the board. And they did. But when I went to work, of course, with Premier Wells, I was only there a couple of months when the whole issue around Meech Lake broke. And we got caught up in that more so than writing the communication strategy for the government as a whole, because Premier Wells needed my support and advice during the whole Meech Lake fiasco. And that's how I got to know all of the national media journalists, because we spent a lot of time in Ottawa just dealing with the fallout from Meech Lake and the negotiations that were taking place. So when the time came for my year leave to be up, I knew I couldn't leave the Premier. I knew we were still in the throes of Meech Lake. And so I said to Dr. Harris, I really can't leave and come back while this is happening. And he said, well, we'll give you another year leave of absence. So that's very kind. And they did. So I took another year. But then with all of that, I still hadn't put in place a comprehensive communication strategy for the government as a whole. as I was expected to do. I had hired individuals who came in to work in the different government departments, but in terms of that comprehensive strategy, I hadn't developed that. And I knew I needed to do that. So after the second year was up, and the university had hired someone, or I had hired someone to fill in my position while I was working in the Premier's office, I knew it wasn't fair to her for me to continue on, because it was putting her in a difficult place in terms of implementing any kind of policy change. So I thank the university profusely for giving me the opportunity to go work with Premier Wells, and then I resigned, and they understood, completely understood. So that left me then working with Premier Wells for 9 years as the Director of Communications.
One thing that really stood out there is you make it sound a lot easier than what it actually is, but you're going into conversations to essentially tell the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador that, no, like, I don't want to work for you, or, you know, even asking your current employer for like more time, which is something that, like, I think a lot of people in my generation really struggle with, is trying to set those boundaries with other coworkers and employees. What advice do you think really helps in terms of that realm?
Well, I think it's knowing what you're capable of, knowing what you can accomplish, being not aggressive, but just being confident in who you are and what you bring to the table, and being able to convey that when you're having that discussion. Because I think it's really important to come across as being confident in who you are. If someone is going to believe in you, believe in what you bring to the table, then you have to be seen as being confident.
Still in that time throughout the university and in that role, what do you think, in lessons wise, you took and just kind of applied it when you started working for Premier Wells and getting into the political side of your career?
Well, that's interesting, because going there initially, of course, it wasn't to be part of or to be engaged in the politics. It was still focused on communications and being able to help the university do what it needed to do to get its job done from a communications perspective, whether you're marketing to attract students to the university, you're communicating what the university is about, what it has to offer. So that was something I liked. I mean, it was something that I felt so comfortable doing, again, because of my writing skills. And if you haven't noticed by now, you did when you worked with me, I have a gift of gab. So it's being able to be an influencer for all the right reasons. So that, for me, while at the university, and again, I had amazing bosses there, both Dr. Harris. Well, when I started out at the university, Dr. Mose Morgan was the president. And then within a year, Dr. Harris became the president. An amazing man, I keep saying that. And what was really interesting for me was I was the only woman sitting around the executive table at the university, and thoroughly enjoyed having the opportunity to show them what a woman can bring to the table. Because unfortunately, we still don't have enough women sitting around boardroom tables. And I think it's always been part of my philosophy and my approach is to see that number grow, because women bring so much to the table. Not that and I say this all the time, not that we're better than men, but that we have different experiences. So when you have people of both genders sitting around the table, it makes for a really good discussion. And at the end of the day, I think you get much better decision-making process because of those different experiences. So for me to go from the university, where I had the ability to do that, And I guess that was part and parcel of my conversation with the Premier in terms of, I have a skill set that I bring to the table. I would expect if I was to give you advice that you would accept that advice. But I think that came from believing in what I could bring to the table and the confidence that I have that I could do a good job. And again, based on my experience. So that's why working with Premier Wells, and again, the only woman in the executive there, I was able to show that women too have a lot to offer.
100%. I couldn't agree more. I think when we see these, board executive tables, the more diverse that they get, we're going to come up with, better things, because unfortunately we can only see the world through our own biases, right? And our own experiences. And nobody is able to really see another experience through somebody else's eyes, because it's just not possible, right? So the more of those tables get diverse, the better as a society and a world we're going to be. From what I've seen in earlier with like your whole conversation, there wasn't really much of, it was always the communication and helping people. There wasn't really the political drive, I would say, in terms of, your communication thing. So is that kind of where you decided why you wanted to get more into politics, to help diversify and kind of lead the way and bring more women into the political chapter of everything?
Well, I think what's really interesting is from a political perspective, I've never had an allegiance up until that point with one party or the other. So I will tell you, I tended always to vote for the individual. So I have voted NDP, I have voted Progressive Conservative, I have voted Liberal, because again, for me, it depended on what that individual was bringing to the table and what platform they were prepared to support from a particular political party. But when I was surrounded by politics, when I was working with Premier Wells, and it was interesting because while I was there, an election came, and they didn't have the Liberals did not have a candidate to run in a particular district, and it happened to be Grand Bank district. So they were prepared to, because they couldn't find someone to run down there, to just let it go. And that individual who was representing the Progressive Conservative Party at the time, just allow him to go unchallenged. And I looked at them and I said, well, that's not democracy. People in Grand Bank need an opportunity. They need to be able to decide who they're going to vote for. And you're not giving them that opportunity, which is not fair. So they looked at me and said, well, what are we going to do about it? And I said, I'll run. I had never run in my life. So they said, you do that. And I said, well, because I think the people in that district deserve the opportunity to hear from more than one person. And I think they need to have a choice. So they said, well, that'd be great. And of course, looking at me as a sacrificial lamb, but somebody who was willing to go down there for that reason. And they said to me, well, if you'll do that, your job is going to be waiting here for you after. I said, well, that'll be good, because I know I'm going to need a job. So I called my husband, because we've done everything together. We're an amazing team. And we've been together, by the way, for 47 years. Well, actually 51, because we started dating when we were 16. But so I called him and I said, we're going to run. And he says, what do you mean we're going to run? We're going to run where and do what? And of course, we had never equated running and politics. Mm-hmm. And but that started to be the language that I was hearing. So I said, we're going to run down in Grand Bank. He says, what do you mean run? I said, well, they don't have a candidate to run against the incumbent. So that means the people in Grand Bank won't have a choice. In that district, they won't have a choice. And I don't think that's fair. So he said, well, what does it mean? I said, well, I'll have a job when it's all over because you know we're not going to win. But we have to go down there. We have to set up an office. We have to find whatever Liberals there are down there and pull together a committee. And I said, there's no money. And so he said, as he's always been so supportive, he said, well, of course we'll do it. So how long is the campaign? I said, it's 3 weeks. And he said, and we have to go down and find people who will support us to set up the office and everything that needed to be done. And I said, yes, we need to do that. He said, okay, we'll do it. So we hopped in the car and we went down, and we had didn't have an office. We had no money. So the party, the Liberal Party, put some money into the campaign. And so then, okay, what do we do now? So then we had to get the list of voters and get involved and knock on doors. And it was hilarious because we were down there having never done this, having never knocked on a door for political reasons. And we did. And what was really interesting was that the incumbent had won the election prior to that by 2,500 votes. We were a week late going into the campaign, and we came within 500 votes by knocking on doors, by being seen, by being heard, by not taking anyone for granted or anything for granted. So if we had gone down a week when the campaign started, we only needed to turn around 250 votes. And somebody said to me, what would you have done if you had won? I said, I don't know. I wasn't prepared to win. I was just looking forward to coming back to my job, but I wanted the people in the District of Grand Bank to have a choice. And so they did. And they chose the incumbent, and that's fine too, because that's democracy. So that was an experience. So then when Premier Wells decided that he was going to retire from politics, and we had a discussion about that, then Premier Tobin came back to the province. And of course, when Premier Tobin came back, he had his own staff, people that he wanted to have in communications. So that meant, of course, that, which happens all the time, is that, people leave, new people come in, they bring their own people with them. So I knew then I had to find a job. But that was when Premier Tobin asked if I would consider running again. And I thought, well, now we're getting serious, because I either find a job doing something else, or I take a chance on running again. And we'd had the experience, so a bit of a bug, it was kind of like, it wasn't bad. That was like, you get to be in the company of so many people and hear so many issues and people discussing what their needs are. And so I spoke to my husband. I said, what do you think? Premier Tobin would like for me to run. And he said, well, it's up to you if you want to do that. And so we did, and the rest is history. It was spent minister in 3 different portfolios under Premier Tobin. And then, of course, when Premier Tobin left, Premier Grimes came in, and I stayed on with him until then. But with Premier, then when the election was called and Premier Grimes lost the election, and we became the official opposition. And while I was in the official opposition, the opportunity came to run federally.
I wonder if the initial conversation with your husband, where he heard run in Grand Bank, maybe in his head he was hoping like, I hope she's saying run over to Sharon's Nook and grab a tea and a biscuit.
Well, because he had never been involved in politics either, right? So the idea of running for something was like, yeah, run to the store, run here, run there. But he's been amazing and so supportive. And don't forget, we still had 3 children.
No, it was actually one of the things that I admired, being able to work alongside you guys, just seeing how much of a team you were, because it's a big testament of almost an example of how, spouses should incorporate each other's like work life balances together. You guys have done it immensely, and it's, for me, it was something that was an ample opportunity to learn from as well.
No, it's good, and it's always good to share your experiences, and I can't imagine because in all of the career choices I have made, they've all been very demanding, and I would never have been able to fulfill the requirements of them without the support of my family.
That first election, you said you didn't expect to win, but as the political careers go on and you start running more and more in these different elections, like you don't only win, like you are predominantly like the favorite in a lot of these election periods. And talking about democracy, the people tend to always show up and vote for yourself. And I'm curious, what do you think really accredits that for you? It's pretty obvious through some of the stuff that you've said.
And for me, I think listening is such a big part of what we all need to do to make a difference. Because if you don't listen, then you don't know. You can have your own opinions. You can, have your own views on things. But if you're looking to make a difference, you need to be a good listener. And I think people have always, and I know there are a lot of people who say, I like working with people. I don't say that. Everyone should like working with people. I think because we're all human beings, and we should all be cognizant of the fact that we're all different. So I like being around people so that I can hear from them what their views are, so that listening to them is just so important. So whether it's in politics or whether it's here in this job that I'm in now, or whether it was working at the university or at CBC or as a teacher, the best thing you can do is be a really good listener.
In regards to, all the political stops, you've been the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, which is incredible to kind of see the whole journey from Grand Bank all the way to Ottawa, right? I mean, it's absolutely astonishing. And it's honestly, for me, it's like, wow, this is like so cool, right? Like the town that my grandparents grew up in, and I've seen it, and to, see yourself strive to be one of the best in terms of Newfoundland. What are some lessons that you've kind of just taken, and or even proud moments? Like for me, like looking at that, I'm like, wow, like this is cool. Like, are you sat back in the chair being like, hey, I did this, yeah, this is cool?
Do I haven't even had time to think in terms of what I've been able to accomplish, because, and it's not just what I've been able to accomplish. There have been so many people along the way, whether it was Mr. John Power at CBC, who gave me the opportunity to come back to CBC after I went away to do my journalism. Whether it was Dr. Leslie Harris at the university. It's just, whether it was former Premier Clyde Wells. Everything you accomplish, it's because someone's been in your corner. It's because someone is there who sees something in you and recognizes that you're a good person, that you're in it for all the right reasons. So in terms of where I am today and what I've been able to accomplish, I will tell you that I thoroughly enjoyed every job that I've had, thoroughly enjoyed them. I thoroughly enjoyed being in politics. And the irony about politics is that there's the perception that because you're involved with a different party, that people who are involved in other parties, that you don't get along. You know, people see what happens on the TV screen during question period, or not, during question period in particular, not so much in debate in the House, but in question period, it becomes theater. But I can tell you when the cameras are off, and particularly if you're a minister, and as you know, I mean, I served as a minister for 3 different portfolios provincially and 1 federally. But it doesn't matter if you're in government or if you're in opposition. You want to deliver for your constituents. So you have to be able to go to the minister and ask for help. And that happens all the time. So you're not bitter enemies as people might think based on question period. You recognize that all people in politics are in it for the right reasons. And that is being able to make a difference, particularly for their constituents. And I've often said that while I was able to accomplish a lot of things and deliver for particularly Newfoundland and Labrador when I was in Ottawa, be able to deliver, some big initiatives. What sticks with me most are the things that I've been able to do for individuals, to help people who would not know where to turn. I mean, there are people who have no idea what an MHA does, no idea what a member of parliament does, but they know Judy. So, calling me, chatting with my support staff, and getting help for them is so rewarding. It's more rewarding to be able to do that and make a difference in the life of one person than to deliver on a big project. For me, my choice to leave politics was a very difficult choice. I would still be there today, depending on if I got elected again, if it wasn't for health issues. So, and as you know, having worked with me, I'm a breast cancer survivor, twice actually. One was my first bout was 20 years ago, and the second one was 5 years ago. So you have your chemo, you have your radiation, you lose your hair, you go through what other people go through when they take chemo and radiation, and you fight to survive. And I'm a survivor. And what I like doing now is being a mentor for other cancer patients. And I say to them, look at me. If I can survive this, you can survive this. But what brought me home from Ottawa, as much as I would still love to be there and be engaged and making a difference, and having that opportunity to sit around a cabinet table that was balanced, that really was the experience of a lifetime, because that showed you what can be accomplished when it's inclusive, when you have people speaking from different points of view based on their experiences, women, men, but having had breast cancer twice, first at a very young age, that meant the next stage was to determine whether or not it was genetic. And unfortunately, it was. And if it just meant me, I can deal with anything. So when it was determined that it was genetic, the next step, of course, was to have my children tested. And unfortunately, 2 of my 3 children carry the BRCA2 gene that I have. And with the BRCA2 gene, it means you're susceptible to any number of cancers, and there's really nothing you can do about it. There's no medication that you can take. So you live day to day, but you don't let it stop you from living. Life goes on. But when two of my three children, when it was discovered that they carried the BRCA2 gene, decisions had to be made. It means that, again, they're susceptible to any number of cancers, including my son, who would be susceptible to breast cancer, although people don't believe that men can get breast cancer, but they can. So then the decision was, well, what if I'm in some other part of the world and they get sick? Because as a federal minister, you're all over the world. Or what if I was in Vancouver and needed to get home? And that's a day's travel to get back. So having that discussion with my family, of course, they were so inclined to say, Mom, you stay where you are because we know how much you enjoy it. And we know what a difference you're able to make there. But my thoughts were, as a mom, I have to be there. And I can't be there if I'm some other part of the world and they get sick. And I couldn't live with that. And I had an incredible boss in Prime Minister Trudeau, who was so supportive and so considerate, who said the decision is yours to make. As much as I like having you around, and we were very close, we worked very close, and very good friends. But he understood. I said, I have to leave. And I have to be where my family is in the event that something should happen. And
100%. Family first always. That's one of the biggest things. With all that being said, politicians and public figures constantly in the public eye, and you also have to hear, obviously you have those conversations with Prime Minister Trudeau, but then, there's other societal members and people of the public who are going to have their own opinions on yourself and things of that. And, how do you maintain that mental health wise, just to kind of block out the outside noise and really hold family first and what's true to you and matters the most, to not let it affect you?
Well, mental health is very important. I don't think there's anyone in the world who hasn't been impacted by mental health. I'm a strong person. I believe in who I am. And there are times when you are impacted by what's going on in your life, especially when it involves your family, which I think is why one of my pillars here as Lieutenant Governor is to focus on mental health. When I came here, when the position was offered, I knew that it was, it's the top job in Newfoundland and Labrador. And there are lots of constitutional aspects to it and ceremonial aspects. But remember now, I had been involved in making a difference for so long that I needed to be able to continue to do that, which I couldn't do from a political perspective because this is nonpartisan. This role is nonpartisan. But I did, in reading through the briefing books for the position, read that as a Lieutenant Governor, I'd be able to convene. I'd be able to bring people together to discuss issues of importance to our people and to our province. And when I saw that, I went, yes, that enables me to keep doing the things that I have been doing for so long, since 1989, really, if you consider that that's when I went to work with Premier Clyde Wells. So we've been doing what I call sharing circles. And I call them sharing circles because I prefer that to round tables. In the Indigenous language, of course, you always hear them talking about circles. And sharing is what we should all be doing in life. We should all be looking out for each other and being concerned about each other. And circles are healing in the Indigenous language. So we started having what we call sharing circles. And I tell you this because the first one we did was on mental health. And because I've experienced mental health issues, you don't go through 2 bouts of cancer without experiencing them. So the mental health sharing circle, first one we did was on bringing together individuals who had lost family members to suicide or may lose members to suicide the next day. And it was to bring together people with shared experiences, but who didn't know the other person existed. So they could learn from each other and make these contacts. So from a mental health perspective, it's something that we all have endured or continue to endure. And this is where the listening is so important as well. So if you look at my life, losing my mother when I was 3, growing up without a mother. So when you'd have a mom to go and confide in, not having that and having to look to others to be able to do that. As good as my dad was, he was amazing. You know, making decisions on your own, really, because again, not being encouraged to do post-secondary and just, you know, doing one thing or the other to try and find your way. And then going to university without being encouraged to go. And then trying to be a mother of 3 children when you didn't have the experience of a mother. So people have different experiences that contribute to their mental health. Some more severe or dire than others. But you have to believe in yourself. Life goes on. And it certainly did for me. Do I still have times when things are tough? Of course. I have the BRCA2 gene. So does it bother me that I have it? No. But it bothers me that my children have it. So there are times when you think the worst, or what if, but you have to get past that.
It's a very important message. Now, Your Honor, what kind of legacy do you hope to leave for Newfoundland and Labradorians?
I love this province. I love the people in it. We share living on an island because, of course, Labrador is connected to Quebec. But living on the island, it kind of brings you think about shared experiences, you know, so whether you can't get off for bad weather and the flights aren't flying, you know, all of these things that are shared experiences. But for me, kindness. It is so important that my approach to things, and that when when people see how I behave, what I'm now doing in this role, apart from what I've done in previous roles, I want them to know that kindness matters and that you make such a difference in the lives of others by caring. So I'm hoping that when I finish in this role as Lieutenant Governor, that people will be able to say, she cared, she made a difference. It was obvious from the things that she did in the role, the initiatives that she took. Yeah, I really want people to be kind to one another.
With Newfoundland and Labrador holding such a close spot to your heart, how did it feel to, be named the 14th Lieutenant Governor and, the first woman to do so as well?
For me, it wasn't about me. I wanted young girls and women to see that this is possible. So when we talk about women having opportunities and young girls having opportunities, I always say, I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth. I grew up in Grand Bank. My mom passed away when I was 3. I worked hard to get where I am. And you can too. So it wasn't until, when I was invested in Confederation Building as the 14th Lieutenant Governor and the first woman, I said at that time, this isn't about me. This is about all the young girls and women in Newfoundland and Labrador who can aspire to be and can achieve the same thing. So I am a role model, and I need to be a good one. I need young girls and women looking at the person who's holding this position and realizing that it's important to treat people with respect. It's important to work hard, and that nothing comes to you just because you want it. You have to believe in yourself. And even though I had been invested, it wasn't until my name was engraved on the Board of Governors here at Government House after the names of 82 men that I went, this is real. This is real. And there's now the name of a woman on that board. And for everyone, every young girl, every woman who tours Government House, because I always say, Government House and the 22 acres of land belong to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. It's not mine. It doesn't belong to the Lieutenant Governor that resides there. But when they come through that door for a tour, because we're always encouraging tours of Government House too, it's our history. We want to make sure we share our history. But when they come through those doors, the tour guides, who are volunteers, by the way, will point to the name of the one woman on the board and say, it happened. It's possible.
An incredible moment for our province, nonetheless. And Your Honor, I want to thank you for your time. And I actually want to share a little story with you that I'm not sure if you remember, but it's one of my most nervous days in the workforce that I've had since my first job at A&W to what I'm currently at now. When we were driving to Subsea Imaging to take a look at their business.
Amazing company.
Incredible. Like, it is so cool what they are doing. And for one, I thank you for, having the experience to tag along. But when I was driving you to and from that location, I don't think I've ever been more nervous in my life. I was like, oh my God, if I get a ticket, if I get a flat, if somebody tries to come and attack it, I'm like, we're going to be on national news and my name is, I'm like the last line here. I was My heart was pounding outside of my chest, and I don't think I've ever been as nervous as that day.
But that was such an amazing visit.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an opportunity. And that's, opportunities you get as a member of parliament, because I was a member of parliament then, or opportunities you get as a member of the House of Assembly to promote businesses in Newfoundland and Labrador. And what we're seeing today with all of the young entrepreneurs who are doing so well, I expect we're leading the country on a per capita basis in terms of the young people who are starting companies, who are doing well. Look at Verifin, who's on the NASDAQ. It was just like, yes, they were purchased. And I just get so excited about opportunities in Newfoundland and Labrador. So even though I'm not in politics as such, I still, as the Lieutenant Governor, make a point of touring businesses in Newfoundland and Labrador, again, to promote them. I'm a big fan of social media. I do all of my own social media. So on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. If you're following me, you're seeing a lot of things about Newfoundland and Labrador, but most especially you're seeing the promotion of Newfoundlanders and Labradors who are doing well.
100%. Your Honor, I want to thank you for your time, and not only just this evening, but I mean, that summer working for you, even though it was brief, for myself, it was a big confidence boost to have your office, reach out. And I learned so much, and it's experiences that I still reflect on, 4 or 5 years later. And I'm sure 20 years later, it's still going to hold very true. So thank you.
Well, it's wonderful to reconnect. And if you're ever in St. John's, please come by while I'm here and say hello again.
Of course. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
All right, everyone, that's it for this week. Thank you so much for watching. And hey, do me a favor. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, comment something down below. And if you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, do us a favor, share it with a friend, hit that review button. And in the meantime, stay best kind.